Every steam turbine locomotive destroyed itself. The same technology that powered battleships across oceans and lit entire cities for decades was strapped to the rails by 6 American railroads, and every single one ended up as scrap. The Pennsylvania Railroad's S2 reached 110 miles an hour with no connecting rods, no side rods, nothing but raw turbine thrust. At 30 miles an hour, it bled its own steam pressure to death. 6 railroads, 6 failures. The answer isn't what failed, the answer is what nobody was willing to give up. Steam turbines were supposed to be the future. On the morning of March 30th, 1945, the Pennsylvania Railroad's S2 number 6200 stormed out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, with Flaw Cartwright at the throttle. No hammering side rods, no pounding pistons, just a rising howl, a machine that sounded more like a destroyer at flank speed than any locomotive built before. The dynamometer car behind her clocked the speed, 110 miles per hour. For 12 minutes, the S2 held that pace, turbine blades spinning at a blur, 6,900 horsepower pouring straight to the rails. Engineers in the test car scribbled numbers as the world outside blurred into a single, unbroken line. Cartwright later wrote that the throttle felt bottomless, the acceleration smooth and relentless. There was no shudder, no rhythmic pounding, just a deep, continuous roar, the kind of sound that gets under your skin and makes you believe anything is possible. The S2 was a spectacle, a direct drive turbine on rails, and for a moment it delivered everything the designers had promised. The train behind it, a full 17 cars, seemed to vanish into the slipstream. This was the turbine at its absolute best: high speed, full load, clean dry steam pouring through the blades. The pressure gauges held steady, the firebox glowed white hot, and the locomotive felt almost effortless. For those 12 minutes, the S2 didn't just keep up with the diesels, it left them behind. The promise was real, and every engineer on board could feel it. But even as the turbine sang at full cry, the clock was ticking. The same physics that made the S2 a marvel at speed would soon reveal the flaw that no amount of engineering could fix. For now, though, nothing on rails moved faster or felt more like the future. Pressure does not just fall in a turbine locomotive, it collapses. On that same March morning, the S2's boiler gauge swung from 310 pounds per square inch to 85 pounds per square inch in under 4 minutes as the train slowed for a signal outside Gary. The firemen scrambled to stoke the fire, but the turbine's appetite for steam was insatiable at low speeds. The numbers from the Pennsylvania Railroad mechanical log tell the story. At full throttle, the S2 could hold 6,900 horsepower, but as the pressure dropped, output cratered. E.S. Cox, reviewing the damage, called it a catastrophic mismatch of machine and duty. This was not an isolated disaster. Across America, 6 railroads bet on steam turbines between 1938 and 1958. Union Pacific's General Electric built units, rated at 2,500 horsepower, promised speeds of 125 miles an hour, but could not survive the crawl of yard work. Chesapeake and Ohio's M1s, each with 6,000 horsepower, suffered the same fate: coal dust choking the condensers, boiler tubes rupturing, pressure plunging from 310 to 85 pounds per square inch after just a year in service. Norfolk and Western's Jawn Henry, a 4,500 horsepower behemoth, was too long for any turntable and burned through its own bearings in months. New York Central and Great Northern both tried, both failed, and both returned their turbines to the builder or the scrapyard before the decade was out. The scoreboard reads like a cautionary tale. 6 operators, horsepower ranging from 2,500 to nearly 7,000, everyone undone by the same physics. They were high-speed, steady-duty turbines that could outpace a diesel on a straightaway, but the moment the schedule called for a stop, a slow climb, or a reverse move, the boiler pressure collapsed. The engineering paradox was now national, not local, a flaw that no amount of horsepower could outrun. Union Pacific's experiment with steam turbine locomotives began with a promise and ended with a shop card stamped withdrawn. In the spring of 1939, 2 streamlined units built by General Electric arrived at the Omaha shops, each boasting 2,500 horsepower and a design speed of 125 miles an hour. The paint was barely dry when the first test runs began. Within days, engineers were logging speeds above 100 miles an hour across the Nebraska plains. The turbines ran so quietly that crews sometimes described them as ghost trains. No pounding rods, just a faint whine and the hiss of steam. But the real story played out in the maintenance records. Union Pacific's shop cards from 1939 and 1940 read like a slow-motion train wreck: generator bearing failures, gearbox overheating, persistent low-speed stalls. The turbines could leap to full speed with a light train, but every time a crew throttled back for a siding or a stop, the boiler pressure would nosedive. At 30 miles an hour, the turbine's appetite for steam doubled, then tripled, draining the boiler faster than the fireman could shovel or the oil burners could feed. The firebox, designed for steady high-speed work, could not recover quickly enough to keep up. Every trip ended with a new entry in the log: overheated bearings after a yard crawl, a cracked firebox stay after a sudden stop, traction motors fouled by oil mist. The turbines spent more time in the shop than on the rails. 6 months after delivery, Union Pacific's mechanical department recommended withdrawal from service. The locomotives were stored, then quietly returned to General Electric and finally scrapped in 1944. For the crews who worked them, the turbines were a paradox, machines that could outrun anything on the main line, but fell apart the moment they had to do real railroad work. No amount of horsepower could save them from the physics of the job. The lesson, written in grease pencil on shop walls and in the margins of maintenance cards, was clear. A turbine built for the open ocean or the power plant could not survive the grind of American railroading. Great Northern's decision to lease the Union Pacific turbines during the summer of 1943 brought the same promise and the same headaches to a new set of rails. With the war draining every available locomotive, Great Northern put the borrowed General Electric units through their paces between Spokane and Wenatchee. Over the course of just a few months, the turbines racked up 15,000 miles, a figure logged in detail in the Great Northern daily shop records. Crews rotated through the cabs, and every shift ended with the same ritual: a shop foreman collecting the day's log, scanning for failures, and comparing notes with his counterpart down the line. The pattern became impossible to ignore. At speed, the turbines glided over the Cascades, their smoothness drawing praise from engineers used to the hammering of reciprocating rods. But as soon as the train slowed for a siding or crept into a yard, the boiler pressure sagged and the turbine's appetite for steam outpaced what the firebox could feed. Great Northern's logs detail the same sequence found in Union Pacific's records: abrupt pressure drops, frantic firing, and a cascade of maintenance issues, blade erosion, pitted bearings, and most tellingly, a buildup of back pressure in the exhaust. That last detail, exhaust back pressure, emerged as a universal flaw. Without a proper condenser, the spent steam vented through a blast pipe, creating resistance that throttled the turbine's own output. On paper, the system should have worked. In practice, the back pressure at low speeds choked the turbine, leading to a spiral: more steam demanded, less power delivered, and a boiler pushed to its limits. Shop foremen, comparing notes across railroads, began to recognize the same handwriting in each other's maintenance cards. The flaw wasn't unique to one railroad or one design. It was systemic, repeating itself from Omaha to Spokane, from the Alleghenies to the Cascades. By October 1943, Great Northern returned the turbines to General Electric with a terse engineering report: smooth at speed, but too thirsty, too fragile, and too costly to maintain. The logs closed with a single recommendation: no further orders. The evidence was piling up, and the real motive for pressing on would soon shift from the shop floor to the boardroom. Robert Young took his seat at the head of the Chesapeake and Ohio boardroom table with a single, audacious number in his briefcase: $1.6 million. That was the contract price for 3 M-1 steam turbine locomotives, signed off between Baldwin and General Electric in 1948 and 1949. The ink on the deal was barely dry when the first unit rolled out of the Baldwin shops in Eddystone, Pennsylvania, serial numbers 756, 757, and 758, each one a rolling testament to the railroad's faith in coal and technology. Young's vision was clear. If steam turbines could pull the chassis streamliner at 85 miles an hour with a 12% fuel advantage over the biggest 484s, then C&O could keep its coal empire alive in a world turning to oil and diesel. The financial commitment was staggering. $1.6 million for 3 locomotives at a time when a proven EMD diesel cost less than half that per unit. The board minutes from June 1948 spell out the gamble. C&O would stake its reputation and its balance sheet on a machine that no American railroad had made work. Young's own statements to the press were blunt. Oil will be exhausted within 30 years. Steam must be perfected. Behind the optimism, the engineering staff raised red flags. Internal memos warned that the M1's condenser system was too delicate for the coal dust and cinders of the Allegheny division. The maintenance department braced for trouble, but the procurement went ahead. 3 units were delivered in less than a year, with the hope that technology could outrun both physics and the market. The money was spent, the contracts signed. The real test would come on the rails, and the cost of failure would be measured in more than just dollars. The debut of the chassis was supposed to be a triumph. Chesapeake and Ohio's 3 M1 turbines, fresh from Baldwin and General Electric, lined up for their first public run in 1948. The marketing machine had promised a new era, streamlined power, luxury speed, and a future-proof answer to the diesel threat. But as the inaugural train rolled out, reality struck with the force of a hammer blow. Halfway up the Allegheny grade, the lead M1 began to lose steam pressure. The fireman William Haynes reported the boiler gauge dropping fast, 310 pounds per square inch, then 200, then 120. The turbine's smooth whine faltered, replaced by a grinding shudder as the locomotive stalled, unable to crest the hill with its own train. The chassis's debut was cut short. Passengers sat in silence while crews scrambled to find the fault. Service reports from that day detail the aftermath. Coal dust had choked the condenser system, traction motors overheated, and a ruptured boiler tube forced the engine out of service before it could even finish its run. Baldwin's engineering team logged the strain on the turbine and the mounting evidence that the locomotive was simply too delicate for real railroad work. The M1s were designed for clean, steady speed, but the stop-and-go rhythm of American rails exposed every weakness. Operating staff on Chesapeake and Ohio began to call the turbines prima donnas, machines that needed perfect conditions and failed spectacularly when those conditions vanished. Every breakdown added to the ledger. Fuel savings on paper vanished in the face of emergency repairs and stranded trains. The chassis streamliner, once the centerpiece of Chesapeake and Ohio's future, was quietly cancelled within the year. The M1s limped through a handful of test runs before being sidelined. Each trip a reminder that physics, not marketing, would decide the fate of the turbine dream. Norfolk and Western's Jawn Henry was the last, and in some ways the boldest, of America's steam turbine locomotives. At 161 feet from pilot to coupler, weighing in at over 1.1 million pounds, it was a machine that seemed to defy limits. The official test reports from 1954 read like a challenge thrown down to physics itself. 4,500 horsepower, a boiler pressure of 600 pounds per square inch, and a coal-fired turbine that could haul 160 loaded hoppers out of Bluefield Yard without breaking a sweat. The Jawn Henry was too long for any turntable on the system. Crews had to turn it on a Y, blocking mainline traffic just to send it back the other way. Ralph P. Johnson, Baldwin's chief designer, saw the Jawn Henry as the answer to every shortcoming that had doomed the earlier turbines. The locomotive's power plant was a marvel, a marine-style steam generator feeding a direct-coupled turbine, all wired to 8 traction motors. In 1955, during the official pull test, the Jawn Henry outhauled Norfolk and Western's own Y6B Mallet, dragging a 10,000-ton coal train up the grade at 25 miles per hour. Even the skeptics in the test car had to admit the numbers were real. The locomotive's smoothness at speed was uncanny. The cab rode steady, the turbine's howl became a steady drone, and the raw force at the drawbar was unmatched by anything short of a big boy. For a brief moment, it looked as though the turbine dream might finally be realized. The Jawn Henry's test logs, still preserved in the Norfolk and Western archives, record mile after mile at full power, with the pressure gauges holding steady and the firebox roaring. In those early months, every engineer on the division wanted a turn at the throttle. It was the last time a steam locomotive would make American railroaders believe, even for a moment, that the future might still run on coal and steam. A steam turbine is a champion sprinter, not a marathon runner. The physics are unforgiving. At full throttle, with the throttle wide and the boiler roaring, a turbine converts steam into horsepower with a grace that no piston engine can match. But the moment the load drops or the speed falls, the numbers turn against it. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers' study of locomotive turbines lays out the penalty in black and white. A turbine running at half power consumes at least 30% more steam per mile than it does at full tilt. Below 1/3 of design flow, steam consumption doesn't just rise, it spikes, draining the boiler faster than any fireman can feed it and turning a high-speed marvel into a liability at every yard limit and signal stop. This is the partial load penalty, the flaw that every American turbine locomotive shared. The S2, the M1s, the Jawn Henry, all of them burned through their own advantage the instant the schedule called for anything less than flat-out running. The engineering logs from Union Pacific and Chesapeake and Ohio are full of the same story. At 100 miles per hour, the turbine is king. At 30 miles per hour, it is a steam-starved anchor. The boiler pressure collapses, the firebox overheats, and maintenance crews scramble to patch up the damage. Yet the flaw was not universal. In Sweden, Fredrik Ljungström abandoned the quest for perfect efficiency and designed his locomotives, like the M3T No. 71, to run without a condenser, accepting a modest loss in peak power in exchange for reliability. British engineers took a similar path with the LMS Turbomotive, which logged 300,000 miles in regular service by choosing a simpler, non-condensing exhaust. These locomotives traded the American obsession with theoretical best for a design that could survive the real world. The contrast is stark. While every US turbine ended on the scrap line, Ljungström's No. 71 still runs today, the last of its kind. The lesson is clear: turbines thrive on constancy, and railroads demand compromise. Today, turbine physics still rule ships and power stations, but never rails. Every turbine locomotive fell to the same immutable flaw. The machine and its world spoke different languages, no matter how much coal money demanded they cooperate. In the end, engineering does not bargain. The lesson: when reality says stop, even giants like the Jawn Henry must listen. What flaw are we still refusing to hear? Let me know what you think below.